Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Wharton Global Youth Meetup Live Alumni Career Chat. I'm Diana Drake, Managing Editor with the Wharton Global Youth Program. As part of our ongoing series of conversations this summer with Wharton graduates, today we're talking with Bill Young, Head of Fintech Partnerships at JPMorgan Chase and Company in New York City. Prior to JPMorgan, Bill spent 12 years in consulting at the Boston Consulting Group, MasterCard and Oliver Wyman, and has also spent time running his own e-commerce venture and angel investing. He graduated from Wharton as an undergrad in 2007 and lives in New York. Bill, thanks for spending time with us today in the gym.
Yeah, of course. My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you back with us for our Wharton Summer High School program. I know you spoke with the students a couple years ago, so it's great to see you again. So I know that you have a presentation. You want to talk a little bit about your career highlights, and so why don't you take it away?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Before I get started, what's the audience here exactly? Or where are these people from? I'd like to just get to know the audience a little better.
Yeah, so these are high school students from around the world. They are very interested in business and finance, and they're engaging with the Wharton Global Youth Program and our summer programs across the board. So any student who is learning with us this summer, whether it be in our Future of the Business World class, our business leadership class, you name it, they're invited to participate in gym activities.
Great, perfect. All right. So, like Diana mentioned, I'll walk you guys through a really short PowerPoint presentation. Should probably take 5-10 minutes. Then happy to kind of answer questions, from her or from the group. So I'm sharing some slides. Let me know if you're able to see them. Everyone can see them, I hope. Okay, perfect. So what I'm sharing with you is kind of how you might see my career journey as it might be listed on a resume. Like she mentioned, I graduated Wharton as an undergrad in 2007. I went to do consulting at Oliver Wyman, which is a financial services consulting firm, for about 5 years after that. Enjoyed my time there immensely, learned a lot about what it's like to work in the finance industry, decided to move into the industry and join MasterCard, which was a huge mistake, and I'll talk about that later too. Found myself not really challenged when I was at MasterCard, decided to launch an e-commerce venture on the side, which failed spectacularly, didn't go the way that I wanted it to. Decided to go back into consulting and went to BCG. Did that for a couple of years, did angel investing for about a year, and then eventually decided to move back into corporate. I think, in truth, I probably should have joined JPMorgan sooner in my career, but I think I had gotten burned so badly during my time at MasterCard that it took me a while to finally make that leap. I actually really enjoy where I am today, and can talk through basically any single one of those career changes over time. Word that really kind of drives me to is kind of what you see on this page here. I thought about how would I think about my career from, in some sense, an emotional journey standpoint. And so what you see here is kind of a chart where I've kind of measured what is my happiness over time, right? Where top obviously being everything's great, I'm super happy, I'm a rock star in the business world, all the way down to this is miserable, I'm not happy at all. I need to quit or do something different. And then kind of the baseline, which is that dotted line, which is this is fine, right? It's not fantastic, it's not terrible, I can live with this. And when I was in high school, I probably imagined the world and how my career journey would look being very up and to the right. You kind of start off in this bottom corner, and then over time you would kind of reach the pinnacle. And so you'd start your career as this lowly grunt, kind of work your way up. You'd get up the staircase, become a manager, one day become a senior executive at some large company. Maybe I'd eventually become the CEO, and then after that, who knows, I could run the world. And that was kind of my very simplistic view of how I thought it would be. And I just assumed that it would be this really clean linear progression, and that everything would just fall into lockstep one after another. I think the truth is that it actually has turned out to be a lot more nonlinear, for sure. And so you can see that a little bit here. This is kind of again, my emotional state over the years. And so, where I came from was like a really modest background. I grew up in like this like desert town, like no love for it. I'm always a little envious of people that are like, oh, I love my high school friends and stuff like that. I have so many fond memories because I didn't. And so for me, like going to Wharton was like great, clean, fresh start. My basic logic for choosing that as a school was like, what's the furthest I can get away from here without having to like learn another language? And so growing up in this like again tiny desert town in like Southern California, Philly was like the exact opposite. Geographically, like economically, like everything, like it could not be more different. And so coming to Wharton like was like a really great moment for me. I felt super proud you know, um, what I will say, and like why you see this huge dip though, is like that first semester was a really, really, really tough learning lesson. I came from an environment where I was basically like the smartest person in my small town to like super dumb relative to like all the incredibly high achievers that I met at Penn. It was really intimidating. I remember getting like grades that I've never seen before. Like you're talking to like a straight A student. I was getting like C's. I think I even saw like an F once. I was like this A looks very funny. Like I think there's like this must be a mistake. And it was very humbling. The good news was like I think after that first semester shock, I just kind of learned to adjust. And so then over time, like sophomore, junior, senior year, I started getting more into the groove of things. The reason why you see another dip here is uh, the other really humbling experience in college is like learning to recruit for your like kind of your internship. And that process is really competitive. It's probably only gotten even more competitive since I did it. So I'm not jealous of those of you who have to think about that. My the recruiting experience during junior year was like a real pain in the butt. It really sucked, but I'm glad that I did it. I learned a lot. I got a great internship. Spent summer in New York. I think like the corporation that I worked for paid for an apartment for me in like Central Park West, like amazing. Like there's no chance I would have been able to find that on my own. Then, college is great again. You go back to school, everything's great. You tell everyone about your great summer internship. The problem was that I knew that I didn't want to go back to them for full time. So then I had to do full time recruiting, which is this other dip that you see in my college career. And then I landed that role with Oliver Wyman. And, I felt great about Oliver Wyman as well. It was like a premier financial services consulting firm. Really important to note that I graduated in 2007, and as anyone who's studied the history books from the last 20 years will tell you, that's right before the great financial crisis. And this dip here was like, I remember the day it was in January 2009, and we basically get a message telling everyone at the firm, like everyone, doesn't matter if you're like in Europe or Africa or like Asia Pacific or just some like podunk town in North America, like you have to come back to the main office. So we do, and like I'm like an idiot because I'm so young at this point. I'm like literally just a year out of school or 2 years out of school. I don't even realize like how much danger that kind of email portends. And sure enough, like one third of my class got fired. Really brutal experience. Two of my best friends at work, got canned, and it was a really bad day. Very tough. And so it just took some while to get over that. Then I had a string of like really great projects. I did, it kind of got past the survivor's guilt from that episode. And then, happens a lot in consulting. Like sometimes you just get like a really bad project, but you're like, shake that off. You're like, all right, like that was a bad experience. You'll notice that at this point, like I start to moderate sort of how I feel. I think when you first come into a job, you can have some really sharp ups and downs. You can feel like really great one second, you can feel like an idiot the next. And so like this is about the time where it's like, all right, like I've felt super great in the past. Now I'm like a little more wary. It's like, all right, I've had enough experience to know that like these good feelings don't always last, and you should be more circumspect and like reflective about that. And then I get on a string of really bad projects for a very long time, and then realize that I need to leave, and that like this up and down cycle is like not sustainable. It's like really tough to handle. It's not the right place to be. So I decided to move into industry. And when I did, I started off at MasterCard. It was just a super easy lifestyle. I after I get over the slump of like, having to interview for jobs, I land a role at MasterCard. It's like easy, then it turns out it's like way too easy. And then I find myself like not sufficiently challenged in my career and then having to find something else to do. And so I decided to make the difficult decision to basically go back to consulting. My wife asked me the question as to like, why would you go back to consulting? Because like you didn't like it the first time, so what's going to be different the second time? I basically told her to shut up and to keep her negative opinions to herself. That's almost literally how that conversation went. But she wasn't wrong because, I kind of had that first honeymoon period where like, oh, like, this is amazing. I remember what this is like. I'm so good at it. All the way down to like, all right, like got staffed on some really, really bad projects again, and you just kind of like you're just bouncing all over the place. And it really is dependent on like sometimes you're on the right role, the right project, you're working with the right people, and then sometimes it's the opposite. Like you get on a new project with different people that it's just harder to get along with, or it's just a much more challenging case. And for me, the moment came kind of at the end of 2016 where we were managing a merger of two very large public companies. And the executives that were involved, it was obviously a very fraught time for them. There was questions around like who stays and who goes, because it's great that you have these two companies coming together, but like you don't need two finance departments, you don't need two technology departments, you don't need two legal teams or two sets of operations, like you need one. And so that means a lot of people are going to get fired in the process. And for those executives, like they can't take out that frustration or anger or nervousness around the uncertainty on the other side, because those may be their future coworkers. But if you have like this third party consultant who's just like supposed to help, but they're not part of your company today, and they're not going to be part of your company tomorrow, then like that's a very convenient punching bag to have in your corner. So you just like they unload on you, and it just gets really difficult. So then again, made the decision to like, you know what, like I really need to find another role. And then, so far, like I've found like a pretty good experience here at JPMorgan for the last 3 years. That's the conventional career track. I also decided to, like I said, found my own company. This occurred at the time that I was at MasterCard, because I went from a job where I was working like 80 hours at Oliver Wyman down to one where like at MasterCard, like I was barely working 35 hours. So it's like, what are you going to do with the extra like 50 hours that you have now each week? And so that's when I decided to form my e-commerce venture. The first 18 months of that, incredibly informative. I learned so much during that time. Like, I was selling like basically home goods online. It was incredibly gratifying to like close my first sale. It was also really great to see like repeat customers, people coming back to you. But after about the first 6 to 12 months, it became very clear to me that the growth wasn't really going to continue skyrocketing. And, it just took me a while to come to the realization that I wasn't really scaling the business, and, just kind of had to make the tough decision that like, hey, like this is not working. And what you've tried was like great and all, but it's basically a failure, and you have to come to terms with that and accept it. And then this is around the time that I decided to go back to BCG, and obviously like I'm way too busy as a consultant to really run that startup the way it needed to be. After I left consulting, I did angel investing for like a year, which sounds like an awesome job, but what I realized is like it's not a real career. Like angel investing is great if you already have a ton of money and you don't really need to work for the rest of your life. And I sincerely mean that. You probably need around $7 to $10 million, I would estimate, really do any kind of angel investing in a meaningful way. And I just noticed that as I kept meeting other angel investors, they were like really mostly retired people, like retired rich people. And I just kind of realized like I was just way too young in my life to kind of accept that as my fate. So all of that is to say, like in summary, like as you can see, like that nice, beautiful straight line that I showed you at the beginning, like that's certainly what I may have imagined my life to have turned out. But you can see here, it's like it's really just all over the map. And the way you feel about your job can vary a lot based on kind of where you are in that moment. And if you feel those highs of success and also those pangs of failure, just recognize that that's a fairly normal way to feel about your career, and that it's highly irregular and abnormal. I mean, if this was like an electrocardiogram, like, like one of those heartbeat charts, like I would be seriously concerned about this patient. But I think from a career perspective, this is actually a pretty normal way to feel about how things are developing. So that's really the conclusion of my presentation. That's kind of like what I wanted to share with you today, and then kind of happy to like answer any questions that you guys may have along the way.
Well, I'm glad I had my mute on because I was giggling the whole way through that. So, I mean, not to laugh at your, vicissitudes of your career, but you were very honest, and I think that's just such a wonderful presentation. So, thanks so much, Bill. Um, Yeah, so it's interesting. A couple questions have come into the Q&A already, and one of them really resonated with me because I remember reading that piece that you wrote in Medium a couple years ago after you spoke to our high school students on campus, and you know you you said when you first got to Wharton you didn't know what consulting really was, but yet you ended up kind of launching your career in consulting. So one of the first questions we got is, what is consulting? So I'm hoping that maybe you can help, provide some context for the students who are watching today around just, what does that career entail?
Yeah, so I'll take a step back. Like, obviously, I had no clue what that was. Coming from, like, again, my small podunk town, I didn't realize that when I came to Penn, like, everyone was like, oh, like, there's like two career tracks. You either go into banking or you go into consulting. And
Right.
so people go, do you know, like, what iBanking is? And I'm like, yeah, it's like internet banking. I do it all the time. And it's like, no, that's not what it is. It's like investment banking. And like consulting was the other career track. So basically, in both career tracks, what you're doing is you're helping people solve problems in their business. They do it different ways. Investment banking, obviously, you focus on like financial structures, how to get a deal done, and stuff like that. In consulting, it's more around like, hey, I have this real struggle with my business. We're not growing as fast as we should. Our cost base is too high, and our expenses are outpacing our revenue growth, which is causing us to become unprofitable over time. And so, why executives who are like 40 or 50 years or 60 years old asking a 20-year-old how to run their business, I still don't really understand that business model, but they do for some reason. And so they often come to like firms like McKinsey, Bain, BCG, Oliver Wyman, like Deloitte, like all these, consulting firms, and they say like, help me solve this business problem. Like, I want to launch a new product. How should I launch it? To which customers? How should I design the product? What kind of customer does it appeal to? What geographies should I launch it? And so they'll basically ask us those questions, and your basic job as a consultant is to help them solve that business problem, whatever it may be, and like help convince them that this is the way that you should chart your future. And like these are really big, meaty, strategic problems for them. And like that's the kind of advice that they're looking for because they need some guidance as to how to make those decisions.
Right. Another thing, I want to unpack some of the things you talked about during your presentation. Another thing that you mentioned was, just getting on bad projects while you were in consulting. And, I'm sure there are many factors that kind of influence how you define a bad project. But one of the key things you said was the people you worked with, right? And I've heard that theme in other things that you've talked about, where people are essential to the success of your working environment. And I was hoping you could kind of talk a little bit about that, because I think some people are charismatic or they're just people, you're a people person is how you're described, but others don't necessarily have that skill going into the workplace. And I wonder what insight or advice you might pass along to high school students about, kind of working well with others and teamwork and, being able to make the most of this advantage of knowing the people you work with and working well with them.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So, I take a step back and I think about like in any job, there's kind of three things you can maximize for. The first one is people, and by that I mean like who are the people that you're working with? Who do you work for? Specifically, who's your direct manager and boss? How well do you get along with that person? I'd say the second thing you can maximize for is subject matter, right? So maybe you find out like, oh, I'm really passionate about technology, and specifically within technology, I really like consumer social media products, right? Or maybe like for me, it's like payments, and like I'm really interested in like consumer payments and how people use credit cards and debit cards in their daily life, right? The third thing you can maximize for is like work-life balance. So some people love travel. Most people actually really hate it, especially for business. It takes you away from your family. You're on the road a lot. It can be a little grueling. Everyone who's ever done travel for business can tell you horror stories about getting stuck at some small regional airport due to like some thunderstorm and like, whatever. Or like working really long hours and just getting killed and crushed. I would tell you, like in your career, always always, always prioritize people over everything else. You can have like a project that, or like some assignment that's like, all right, subject matter wise, I wasn't really looking to learn more about this. Work-life balance wise, I'm burning more hours than I would like to, or I'm traveling more than I wanted to. But if you like the people and you get along really well with them, those things kind of fade into the background. Now, over time, they can become problems and it will accumulate, and you should address that. But if you work with the right people, like a boss that's very empathetic, or with colleagues that are really good about it, they'll hear you and they'll be like, you know what, Bill, you bring up some good points. Let's find other work that is more interesting to you, or like let's come up with an alternative work arrangement that is that like maximizes or like at least optimizes for some parts of like what would make you happy. I've had the converse where like I've been on projects that seemed very easy and it was subject matter that I liked, but like I was working with the wrong people. Like my boss didn't really like me, did not really trust my work, kept second guessing everything that I put in front of them. That's a really bad place to be. And mentally, it's just a bad space because you're constantly doubting yourself. And that will really inhibit your ability to grow and develop your skill set. And I know the next question is going to be like, well, how do you filter for that? And the answer is, unfortunately, when you're very young, you just kind of have to take what comes at you. So you're just going to have to learn to identify like what are signals that this is a good boss to work for. Like when I make a mistake, do they cover for me? Do they help teach me why I made that mistake and like patiently walk me through it? Or like, are they really dismissive? Do they get angry easily? Do they kind of just like drop me like a hot potato? Like those are the things that are like really difficult to suss out. And like, I wish I had known that and someone had told me that beforehand. Here's the problem. Even as I'm telling it to you right now, it's one thing to hear it, it's quite another to live it yourself. And you'll see what I mean over time. Like you'll become very aware of like who are the people that support you in your career and really try to promote you along. And it's all based on how do they act around you. Do they try to promote you? Do they try to talk you up? If you tell them, like a good question is like, if I wanted to leave tomorrow, would I feel comfortable enough telling my boss? If the answer is like, I have that rapport and mutual respect and trust and understanding, they won't take offense to that. That's a very high bar, by the way. I would say 90% of my managers, if I told them tomorrow I'm leaving, like they'll just like they'd cut my badge right in front of me. They'd be like, all right, you're done, you're finished. And like that's just generally like kind of how I've thought about like what does it mean when I say like it's really important to focus on the people.
Yeah. So, but the other part of my question was, what if you don't necessarily have those people skills? I mean, do you have any advice for how to develop them in the
Yeah,
work?
a lot of it is kind of through experience and just being a very careful listener. And that's something that even I've found myself working on. So I think it's important to find ways, like for me, like I've always been someone who's very proactive, who like I'll be the first to admit that like sometimes I think too highly of myself, right? And I think it's important to sometimes be mindful and respectful of your colleagues and realize that they're also protagonists in their life story as well, and that you really want to lead through influence. What I mean by that is like you want to convince people that this is the right thing to do. Very rarely in my career have I been able to just point at someone and be like, you need to do this. Like that's a really rough and difficult way to get things done because like that person is not your subordinate. And even if they are, you still don't tell them do it that way. Rather, you want to logically guide them through like, here's an objective that I think we both can agree on and align on that this is an objective we want to like do together. And like I'm pulling you in because I want this to be inclusive and I want it to be a shared success. So like go a little heavy on the praise and always make sure to give credit to people when they actually did the work. And what I mean by that is like say like, hey, like XYZ person, like if someone says like, hey Bill, like that was great work, you're like, hey, you know, I can't take credit for that. It was really a team effort. Specifically XYZ person did this thing. Or even better, like let them send the email or like let them present that work in front of, you know, the management team. I'd say right now for you guys, that person should be you right now. But as you go up the chain and you eventually become more senior yourself, have that comfort to share that credit where credit is due. And in your earliest days, when you're the lowly grunt at the bottom of the totem pole, honestly, just volunteering to get the work done. Like there's a lot of stuff that needs to get done inside of a company. There's not enough hands. Being the person who can raise their hands and be like, hey, I know this is a little bit outside my remit, but like, and again, check with your manager to make sure that it's okay with them. But if they say like, yeah, you can help out, man, raise your hand and just volunteer to get the work done. Like that's always really welcome. And you'd be surprised how few people take that initiative.
Very good advice. And I think one thing we can take away just from the nonlinear path that you followed, I mean, the main message there to me is that you don't have to, you don't have to grind it out. You don't have to stick with something that isn't personally satisfying or that you feel is not advancing your career the way you hope or not a growth opportunity. Like you can look for something else, right? I think sometimes even I think back to my 17-year-old self, I would be like, oh, I just have to do this. I have to stick with this because otherwise it's a failure in my life. And, but really you do have choices, right?
That's absolutely right. I mean, I certainly came from like, I have like pretty conservative Asian parents, and it was drilled very early on in my life, like don't quit on anything, stick with it. And there's definitely a point in like, especially like my career in Oliver Wyman, where I was probably like, you know what, you should have like you should have pulled the ripcord way sooner on this one. Like you should have just like, I stayed there a little too long, partly out of that mentality of like, oh, I should really stick with it. I mean, they also sell you really hard on this vision of like maybe one day you'll become like partner at Oliver Wyman, you'll be the big boss, blah blah blah. Now it's like a little older. I'm like, it's a good career path, but it appeals to a very certain type of person. And if you know that you're not that person, then like, why should you keep trying to work so hard to fulfill that destiny when maybe you were meant for something else? And just being cognizant of that there are other options. Like, never back yourself into a corner where you feel like you absolutely have to do it this way and there's only one way to get it done. Like, be a little more open-minded, and more importantly, like, be forgiving to yourself. Like, I think sometimes we hold ourselves to too high a standard, and that can create a lot of stress and unnecessary pressure on ourselves. And like, that's a very common problem with people who are like highly motivated, highly driven, used to success and being good at the things that they are. And just like, be kind to yourself in that process of like realizing like, hey, I need to go a different.
Yeah. So there is a question from a student here, and I know you did say you had an internship. Did internships or mentors help you decide what kind of career you wanted? So maybe, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think so. I think like any work experience is good. To your point earlier, Dana, as to like how do you become better at people skills? Like for me, man, I made so many mistakes like in my career. Like I look back at like some of the emails I would send people and stuff, and I'm like full on cringe. I'm like, oh, I can't believe I sent that. Like, no wonder they hated my guts. Like I sent too many emails. Maybe the emails were too long. Maybe my tone of voice wasn't good in an email. This is also another thing for this generation in particular. We're so used to communicating via text or email as opposed to face or over the phone. And that's only been compounded and exacerbated by the distance that's been forced upon us by COVID. Like, as you guys probably know, having had like, I'm sure you've either sent or you've received a text from a friend where like the tone just like came off really wrong. Like it sounded very forceful, and then like you pick up the phone, you call them, and you're like, what did you mean by that? And it's like, hey, sorry, like don't read that much into it. What I meant was like this. And it's like when you have those like kind of things to deliver, like deliver that in person or over the phone, because the tone, the human emotion behind it means so much. And yeah, it's just one of those things where like I look back at like sometimes the way I just came across on things, and I was like, wow, that was really not the right way to have done it. But that's why those experiences are so important, is because you just get it out of your system. Like I'm sure I know for a fact there's relationships I've burned along the way, probably because I was so clumsy in the way I handled it. So very helpful to exercise those demons early, especially since I didn't go back to that place after my internship. So I was like, oh, I'll never see these people again. So that actually worked out really, really well for me.
Yes, that was a good choice. So some of the questions that are coming in from our viewers are actually related a little bit to your current position. So I'd like to know a bit more about your work at JPMorgan Chase. So you are head of Fintech Partnerships. Can you tell us exactly what that means? And also
Yeah.
maybe give like just give an overview of fintech. What is financial technology in a couple sentences?
Yeah, absolutely. So like at a big picture, like I think people know like the JPMorgan brand. It's a huge like, US bank with like lots of global presence. We have a lot of different businesses. We have a very large like asset wealth management business, which includes managing money for like incredibly rich private individuals, not me, unfortunately. We have like an investment bank that does a lot of like advisory for our, like Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, you name the company, we probably have some sort of banking relationship with them. And then there's the consumer, people like you and me, and that's represented under the Chase brand. I'm sure you've all seen a commercial from Chase featuring like Kevin Hart or like Serena Williams or whatnot. There's a lot that we do there. I work for the Chase part of the business. So I work for products that touch individual consumers like you, me, my parents, so on and so forth. And what we do is a lot of times we take a step back and we say like, hey, like what are Chase, not even just Chase, what are consumers interested in America? What are they doing? And are they doing it with us? And if the answer is no, they're not doing it with us, then there's a really good question of like, why aren't they doing it with us? Because we're a little greedy like that. We want to serve all your needs under our roof. And a lot of the times we find our Chase customers are using products from fintechs. So financial technology companies, as they're called, basically just provide unique services that a lot of times traditional banks don't. And the reason why is because they're a lot smaller. That means they're a lot nimbler. And while their product suite is usually very narrow, and in fact, in a lot of cases, they're just offering really one product, they do it really, really well because that's all their company does. It's so easy for them to be good at that thing because that's the only thing they're doing. Whereas for Chase, we have to do like a million things for our customers. And so sometimes these fintechs just find that little gap and they're like, you know what? Like if I'm like Robinhood, like people want free stock trades and they want to do it in like this really clean user interface in a beautiful mobile app. And the problem with like Chase is like, well, okay, we can make it free, I guess. But if you've ever used like the Chase app, there's like a million things going on in our Chase app. Whereas for Robinhood, you just do one thing. You're here to place stock trades. That's it. And so then the question becomes like, should we do something like a Robinhood? And if the answer is like yes, and I'm not saying it is, but let's say it is, if we want to do like what Robinhood does, like how do we partner with them? Or should we invest in them? Or should we even like think about like doing something bigger scale? And that's what my team really does is we figure out like who are external partners, Chase, where we want to partner, invest, or potentially even acquire, because we think that's the capability that our customers really want and we want to make it available to them.
Can you give one example of a partnership that you
So
helped to forge?
yeah, like a really good one to think about is like we have like Chase First Banking, which is a solution that we give to parents so that way their kids can get bank accounts very easily. And the partner that we worked with there is Greenlight. You can look them up, and they provide a lot of these like services for like usually actually teenagers, folks like yourselves, even middle schoolers, and it's a great way for parents to sort of give a bank account to their kids. That way, like it's kind of independent, but at the same time, like they still have oversight and the ability to manage those funds on behalf of their children, while at the same time giving their kids the chance to like develop their own financial lives. So what I think is really great about that, it's like obviously a great way to empower, you know, Gen Z youths and whatnot to like manage their lives the way they want to, while at the same time also giving like that link to the parents so that way like they can fund your allowance into that account, they can like, provide disbursements and stuff like that. It just makes it creates a really strong, I think, financial link between the parent and child, but in a way that still gives like, teens like their independence and ability to control it. And that's something that we could have only done, I think, through that partnership with Greenlight. So I think that's a good example of like where we've built a product, we've brought it to market, it's seen a lot of success, and we really like it, and it's the right value proposition for our customers.
So I have to ask you because we saw those peaks and valleys on your chart. What is it about your current experience that is gratifying? Why do you feel that you're in a good spot right now with your career?
Yeah, I mean, like I like the independence that my role provides me. I obviously have a lot of control over my career in that sense. I think the work itself is genuinely quite interesting. I obviously get to bring like the full scale of our consumer bank around, and like, you can hardly do better than Chase when it comes to US banks. And I'd say like in my case, I don't really have to go looking for these companies. It's actually the inverse. It's a lot of these companies are looking to talk to me. So that makes my life a little easier. I think the other thing that I really like is I really do like the people that I work with. I have a really good connection with like the senior management within the bank. And of course, like even the people that just work on my team or that I work with as peers, like, they're generally pretty smart, they're pretty ambitious, they've got a lot of options. And so it's gratifying to know that like also like as much as I'm enjoying my career, hopefully I'm also structuring the kind of opportunities for them that make them feel better about the fact that they've decided to stick with the bank as well. Because our most valuable assets aren't the dollars on our balance sheet, it's the people that work inside the building. And every single day, our most valuable asset walks out the building. They go down the elevator and exit the lobby doors. And if we don't create the right environment for them to succeed, they're not going to come back in the next day. And, I think that's something that, for me is like a really motivating challenge to make sure that they feel fulfilled in their careers as well.
So we do have a question in here from one of our viewers. It's funny because I actually had this question because I felt like they would want to know. Anytime a fintech conversation comes up, people want to know about cryptocurrency. So I don't know if you feel, ready to answer this, but is cryptocurrency really the future is the question.
So I'm going to be very clear. I'm not speaking as a representative of JPMorgan, so please do not turn around and be like, well, Bill Young says blah, blah, blah this. As you guys know, Jamie Dimon, who's the CEO of JPMorgan, is pretty bearish on crypto. I can't say I really disagree with him. I do think there's probably too much attention paid to crypto. And I think part of the reason why is because it's like the most speculative fiat currency you can imagine. Like Bitcoin is like gold for millennials. If any of you have ever like watched like a late night infomercial and like, you see like your grandpa or grandma watching like, oh, like we buy gold and like we invest in gold and all this other stuff, you probably like roll your eyes and go like, that's like probably a scam, right? I kind of have the same reaction sometimes with Bitcoin. I'm not saying that it's fraudulent or anything. I'm just saying like people pay way too much attention to it, I think, relative to its actual economic value and utility. And, I'm sure people are not here to start a flame war about the value of crypto or Bitcoin. Like, I get it. You can make a lot of money doing it. I would just say, like, if you were to manage your own money, like, personally, like, I would keep a really small percentage of it in Bitcoin, like way less than 10%. And so I get a little worried when I see people like betting the farm on these like on like crypto, on like meme stocks and things like that. Like that bothers me a little bit because I really want people to keep their money and to grow in a way that will serve them very well into their retirement. Like I want you to get rich, but like get rich slowly. Right. And I think I just get worried when people like see like these numbers move like, oh, it went up 10% today. And then like, yeah, but it could also go down 20% tomorrow. So be really thoughtful about how much risk you're taking on. I think that's the number one rule in finance.
Great. All right. We'll pivot from controversial crypto to this question, which is, what is it like living and working in New York City, and how do you relax?
Yeah, I mean, I love it. I love the city. I think there's like electricity in the air in New York. And I know that sounds like an exaggeration. I'll tell you a story. My first day flying into New York, it must have been like during the 4th of July parade or something in town. I remember the plane like coming over Manhattan and then it's like banking into like, I forgot, like LaGuardia or JFK or something. And they have like these barges that they put down, like, and that year it was like the East River. And there were like literally fireworks coming off. Like it was like the craziest thing just to like have this plane do like a low flight over like all these skyscrapers. There's like boats filled with fireworks, literally throwing them up. And I was like, oh my God, like this is like the perfect place to go. And like obviously I've never seen that again flying over New York, so not gonna happen, right? But like for me, that was my introduction to it. And I've loved it ever since. I mean, it's just so dynamic. You meet so many different people here. it's got a really like, I don't know, just there's just a never-ending number of things that you can do in the city. I think the hard part most people will find, and true for myself too, is like it's just a very expensive city to live in. So it's really the economic consideration that probably pushes most people out. But like, man, like museums, theater, like just walking around and like being around other people and like getting that energy, like it's just so much fun to like sit down on like, the steps of like Grand Central or the Metropolitan Museum of Art and like literally just watch life go around you. It's like there's just something so fascinating. Like when you walk the streets of New York, you'll just see like random crazy stuff. And it's just like, that's really cool. And I can't imagine anywhere else in the world where I would have seen that thing. And it's just like, it's just so exciting. Like you fall in love with the city all over again.
Yeah, you never quite know what you're going to get from day to day. That's great. So I know you've done your share of hiring in the business world, and I want to know what qualities impress you the most in new recruits. What for these students who will be going through interviewing processes and starting out on that new career path, what would you advise them?
Yeah, I'd say a couple of things. One of the things that I really look for in people that I like interview is like I want to see like a really high level of curiosity and like constructive curiosity. Like you're asking me like really good, thoughtful questions that show that you've thought about my business, that you really care about it, that's something that gets you motivated and interested. I think the other thing is just like do your homework. Like I can't tell you how many people show up to interviews like completely unprepared, and like that's always like a little depressing. And I think when someone's like genuinely interested in what it is you do, they'll just like come up with a bunch of stuff, and it's always really motivating. I mean, like for me, part of what keeps me fueled at my job is being surrounded by people who are like similarly passionate and motivated as well. Like I feed off of that, and like I love working particularly with like young people because it's like it's new blood. For them, everything is new. They bring a lot of like passion and enthusiasm, and like that's very motivating for me. Like I love that. And so I would say like for you guys, like in particular, like having that high like sort of cycle rate is really, really critical. And like you can talk like as you just saw, like when I talked about like New York City and why I love it, like I think you guys could tell like how much I love the city. And so if I can meet someone who shows that same love for like what it is we do on a day-to-day basis, even if you don't exactly know what it is I'm doing, but like you're just genuinely interested in the space, like that is very hard to fake. And it's very clear that it's a genuine enthusiasm. And I think that's the kind of thing that like I rarely see, but like leads me to always think to myself, like that's an instant hire. That's someone we should bring on board.
And I think the thread in there, the essential part of that is the storytelling piece, because
Yeah.
you were telling us a story about something that just impacted your life so deeply. And I think that skill is something that is great for young people to learn, is to be able to kind of tell the stories of their experiences without just, because it shows and illustrates what they've been through rather than talking about it.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it gives it a lot more color. Well, we're up on our time. I guess I really don't want you to go without. I remember reading somewhere that you said that you last minute applied to Wharton undergrad and ended up going, of course. So I'd just love to know what influence Wharton has had on your life and your career.
Yeah, I mean, for me, a huge one, obviously. I met my wife at Penn. My best friend that I like grab dinner with once a week came from Penn. By the way, that sounds really unimpressive to you coming from high school, but when you've got like a full-time job, like a team to manage and all this other stuff, like regularly meeting someone once a week is actually not super easy, given all your other like personal and work commitments. And so for me, like, yeah, obviously like Penn's been incredibly influential. I obviously wouldn't have volunteered my time to like speak with you today if I didn't believe so strongly in, that Penn and Wharton experience. It's just an incredible opportunity to meet like some of the smartest people around the world. And like Penn's basically done all the heavy lifting for me, and just like they already pre-filtered like, all right, like we think this person's pretty smart and capable, well-rounded. They've got a lot going on in their lives. And so someone's gone to all that effort to basically filter out the best in the world and puts them in like one place geographically. And then this goes back to like how important that physical presence is. Like you'll run into these people all the time, right? and you're going to spend like 4 years together in that bubble. You'll never get an experience like that again in your life, ever.
Bill, thank you so much for joining us today in the gym. It's been fun talking with you and learning about your career.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
And thanks to all of you for tuning in. We'll see you next time in the gym.
All right. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.